I'm
Thank
Rob
you.
with Alaska Apple Farms, and just I've been doing this for I don't know the last 20 years here in Southeast Alaska. I'm located in Hoona, Chichagof Island. So we've been kind of pioneering really just micro orchards. I got into it just seeing large fruit trees in our community that were thriving, and of course there was a lot of talk around our area that apples couldn't grow in Southeast Alaska, but it was obvious that many could. And so um, just been doing a lot of experimentation over the years, and what you're seeing in these photos really is some of the older trees. The one on the left is what they call pristine, and that's not quite ripe, but it just kind of gives you an overview of kind of the production availability, and that root system's on an M7. But and the photos on the right, we do a lot of greenhouse presentations occasionally. One of them being on the Chilkat Valley orchards. There's actually some stuff on YouTube regarding some of the stuff that we've done here. One of them in particular is micro orchards in greenhouses. And the photo you've seen on the right really is that fruit on there is actually unique to where we live. I call it Sweet Savland. It was a rogue variety. And being outside, it didn't quite go to the full potential. And we're actually experimenting with that and sent that one down to Washington. And they're actually doing samples on to see how the production might happen down there. But the fruit you could see is pink and plush. But we do a lot of Honey Crisp in the greenhouse as well. But anyways, these photos just kind of represent uh, much of our success. The one on the left is our number one variety for our area has been Williams Pride. And really the advantage that we focus on because we are a very wet climate is disease resistant, especially focusing on apple scab, which if you're not familiar with apple scab, I think up north it's a little different. It is different. A lot of the varieties up there may not work for here. We just fight a lot of fungals. And so we try not to spray. We don't spray any of our apples. And so the fruit tree on the left is probably about a 12, 13-year-old tree. And you can see the production we get on there, and they're big fruits. And that apple is obviously red, but we also get red highlights in the middle. And again, on the right is pristine. And those are really the two ones that we focus on a lot here. We have many other varieties we do, but those photos just represent some of the better successes for our area in Southeast Alaska.
Thanks, Rob. Okay. And then these are Steve. Would you like to introduce yourself and your orchard?
There we go. Off mute now. Yes, so I'm Steve Masterman, and Sarah, my wife, and I have a small business in Fairbanks called Alaska Fruit. And on the right of this picture here, you can see our two orchards. Our old orchard is about a quarter acre. We started planting that in 2008. And the bigger orchard on the left, we planted mostly in 2021. There's about 500 trees in there. And in the cherries, there's 360 cherries and about 400 honeyberries. And we have yeah, about almost 100 varieties of apples and maybe a dozen varieties of plums and 15 to 20 pears, a handful of cherries and a handful of honeyberries. And we do we graft trees. We do a lot of grafting in the spring. We probably graft 400 500 trees every year. And we have a little nursery bed there at the top of the right-hand picture where we plant things and raise them in there. And we just recently started growing our own rootstock. And there's another in the kind of lower right there, there's a little bed marked rootstock, and that's where we started growing our own rootstock from seed, and then also we started stooling it or layering the rootstock as well to start cloning some of the seedlings that we like. And we're getting the seeds from trees growing around Fairbanks. So that really we graft our apples under Siberian crabapple. That seems to be the most hardy rootstock for the apples. The plums, we're mostly on American plum right now, but we do have some other things going. We have some um, probably Prunus salicina rootstock growing in our rootstock bed that we're stooling, and we have some Mustang roots that are growing in there as well, and we're going to start grafting onto those. The pears are grafted onto Pyrus usuriensis. We have a few trees that are grafted onto Dolgo. That seems to do okay. And we have a few others that are also on G890. And it'll be interesting to see how those do after this winter because yeah, we had 39 below, I guess, was the coldest we had out in the orchard this winter. As you can see, the photo on the left there, that one is a Lee 22. That's but I just wanted to put that picture in there because we grow our trees freestanding, and there's no trellis work, there's no support. We do stake them when they're young, and we take the stakes out eventually when they don't seem to need it anymore. But yeah, they're freestanding. We do have issues with snow. We have issues with breaking branches, and we try to keep the low branches off because they get ripped off by the snow load especially in the spring. So yeah, on the left there, that's Lee 22 loaded with apples. They're a nice size, 3-inch apple. And on the right there, those are Evans cherries. They do really well here. The other cherries that we have are mostly the Romance series, like Romeo, Juliet, Tom and Jewel, Valentine. We do have some Crimson Passion and D'Artagnan and Big Red and Cutie Pie, I guess. We'll see how those all do. But the others are fruiting, and this is a pretty mature Evans cherry there on the right.
Great, thank you, Steve. Okay, I think I must have. Okay, there. I knew I wasn't crazy. Okay, yeah, I'll if you want to introduce yourself and Boyer's Orchard.
Yeah, my name is Yael Hickok, and Boyer's Orchard is in South Anchorage. I actually live in Chugiak, but Boyer's is a 1 acre orchard. It was started in the late 90s by Robert Boyer, who was a retired photographer. And it was just a hobby, and he enjoyed experimenting to see what he could get to grow in Alaska, having come from Pennsylvania, apple country himself. And I never met Bob. I actually did not start helping over there until after he had passed away, sadly. And his wife was looking for some help to sustain the place. And that evolved into me basically learning a lot. My education background was in forestry, not in cultivating apple trees, but some of the information crossed over. But mostly, I was a gardener who wanted to learn about growing fruit trees in my yard. And I learned about Boyers, found out at the time it was close to my home, started coming over to help Marianne take care of the place and learned so much. And after Marianne passed away, I formed a nonprofit called the Friends of Boyers Orchard, and we are working to try to financially raise the funds to be able to purchase the orchard or lease it, a long-term lease from the son, who isn't very much interested in growing fruit trees, but is very supportive of our cause. Um, at Boyer's Orchard, we also have a greenhouse. It's about 2,500 square feet. It has automatic vents and heating and irrigation. However, the heating only kicks on at 0 degrees or below. So many of the fruit trees that are in there marginally could do well in Anchorage, certainly not in the winter that we had last winter, but some winters the heat never kicks on or very little. This year it has kicked on numerous times. We also turn the heat on as a way to preserve the roof of the greenhouse so that if we get a big snow load, we'll go turn that on. Um, there's about 75 trees in the greenhouse. They are primarily apple trees, but there are also peaches, apricots, quince, plums, nectarine, and pears. I think that's all of them. Um, of different varieties, the more cold hardy ones. And we also have several trees that we call Frankenstein trees, in which we experiment with new varieties without committing to a whole tree. And that's what grafting is all about. Um, out in the orchard, we have mostly apple trees again, but very like lots of different ones. There's very few duplicates. So many of the varieties, we just have one tree of it. So we also have about 100 varieties of apples total on the property. Outside, we also have cherries, primarily tart cherries, including Evans and Carmen Jewel. We have pears, a few plums, and we are starting to get more intentional with our berry bushes. There are a few haskell's that were planted by Bob Boyer, and we've recently expanded and we're increasing the area where we're doing more of that. We also have some service berries growing. And Bob liked to experiment. That's what's really fun about the place is um, there's a lot of surprises over the years as I've cleared overgrown brush or done research on some of the trees or done DNA testing as we've learned some really interesting and curious things. One of the fun things that we have growing in the orchard is a pear bush. So it's a pear growing on a serviceberry rootstock. And that's so it never gets more than about 5 feet tall. It stays short and it produces a variety of pear called Flemish Beauty. But the root suckers that come up are all a serviceberry. It took me a while to figure out what was going on there. Bob's organization system was creative, to say the least. So I'm always learning. Also, you see the picture. We have a beekeeper. One of the things I learned was that getting bees on the property was really important. In Because we have blossoms in the greenhouse starting in April, even late March sometimes, not this year, but so it's nice to have bees on the property because until they arrive and they're waking up, we're having to hand pollinate inside the greenhouse, which is a lot of work. So um, yeah, so those are the things that are going on, and we because we have such a wide variety, I've started collecting and sharing the Scions, and we're going to talk more about what that is and why that's important. That's why you guys are here. Because if you're interested in growing fruit trees, and I think we're going to mostly be talking about apple trees, but some of the information crosses over. But if you're interested in growing your own apple trees in Alaska, because of our unique climate and our unique situation, shipping being what it is, the cheapest, the least expensive way, and the way that you're going to guarantee success the most is by grafting your own apple trees. But even if you don't graft your own apple trees, I think it's important to understand the concepts that are involved because almost any apple tree and many of the fruit trees that you purchase will be grafted. That means they're a combination of one root system. So that's one genetic system is the root system, and then a different genetic system is the scions. So I don't know if you want me to dive into that from this point.
Yeah, I think
Iva,
that would be
you're
great.
keeping track. Okay.
Yeah, and
All
I
right.
can also like use my, do you guys see like a little like pointer?
Yes.
It's kind
Mhm.
of fun. I've never used that feature before. Um
Okay.
so
So
yeah, so
I'll
this is
explain a
the,
little bit about what's
yeah,
going on here in
yeah.
this photo. So the reason we're talking about scions, I'll explain what those are. Scions are the branches that we use for grafting, and those are up on the top left of this photo. And they're not very remarkable. They're just little branches, are about the size of a pencil. Um, and they are what determines the variety of fruit that you get. Almost always, when you go to a nursery or if you go to commercial orchards, 99% of the time, you have apples that are not growing on their own rootstock. So you have a grafted tree. When you come to Boyer's and we do field trips for kids, that's one of the things I point out to the kids is I tell them to look down at the bottom of some of the established trees and they show a little bit of a bubble, where the trunk seems to be expanded on the bottom. And I explain that that's the scar from when the tree was a baby and we grafted it. And I explain to the kids, and this is kind of a weird way to do it, but sometimes it helps me to dumb things down. Is I explain to them that let's imagine that you decided you want to have really muscular arms. Like you've always wanted to have really big muscular arms, but you're no matter how much you work out, you're really puny and you can't get there. And you see and you see somebody at the gym and they have these big muscular arms and you're like, man, I really want to have arms like that. So in theory, if you had the magic powers, you could like go cut that guy's arms off and put them on your arms, and then you'd have these big buff beautiful arms, right? And so that's basically what we're doing. We're not changing the genetics of the root system. We're only adding a different variety to the trunk or the limbs. And depending on when you do the grafting, is if it's trunk or limbs or a combination. And grafting is a really ancient art form. It's a really ancient science. It goes back thousands of years. It's mentioned in the Bible. Um, and what the reason we do it is because the root systems of the trees that we want have a are great genetically because of the roots. They have a great genetic roots that is hardy and strong. And the root system determines the size of your tree. It determines the hardiness of your tree, how what kind of survivability it's going to have in different temperatures, and it's going to somewhat help to decide on your disease resistance of your tree. However, a lot of these crab apples that make wonderful root systems because of their hardiness would grow fruit that is not tasty to eat. And so, because of that, that's where we have the grafting. The grafting is basically cloning. So you're taking a clone, which is the branch, an established branch from a tree of a variety that you like, uh, something that's familiar that we've all seen in the stores, like Honeycrisp. If I was to grow the rootstocks of these Siberian apples that have a great hardy rootstock, the apples are not going to taste good and they're not going to be enjoyable, but I want something that tastes like a Honeycrisp. So I'm going to find somebody that's growing a Honeycrisp apple, cut off the branches, or they're going to cut it off for me. The Scions is now what we call them. Once they're cut off, they're called a Scion. And I'm going to graft it into my tree. The reason we're talking about this now is because Scion collecting needs to be done in the dormant season. If I'm going to go cut off the arms of that dude, it's really big. I'm going to want him like asleep. I don't want him knowing what's going on. So we need to do this when the trees are asleep, which is now in our season. Down in the lower 48, they're pretty much finishing up that right now. For us, this is really right in the middle of the ideal time to collect those scions. So the last couple of weeks, I've been collecting them at Boyers. We had some volunteers from the King Tech School kids. I taught them about grafting and scions, and they collected them for us. And so we collect them, we label them. That's really, really, really important to label them correctly. The scions, they're about the size and shape of a pencil. And we'll talk more about what we're looking for. And then we store them until we're ready to do grafting. And when you are grafting, the scion needs to be dormant, but the tree that you're grafting onto needs to be awake. So in that picture where you saw the rootstock laying down on my cutting board, that is what we call bench grafting. So that's where you buy or you order a bunch of rootstocks from a nursery or from the Fruit Growers Club or whatever. You'll bring them into your house or your garage, and that's what they'll look like. And then you're sitting there at home with you can use a box cutter, you can use a knife. There's certain grafting tools, and you're going to prepare, but you're going to pull your scions out of the fridge. Scions have to be dormant and sleeping. The rootstock has to be awake and ready for the juices to flow so that they can go together. So this is the time to collect and prepare and plan, and then the grafting will happen in about a month or two. So this is also the ideal time for pruning your trees. So collecting scions and pruning happens at the same time, which is during the dormant part of the winter, the later part of the winter. You don't want to do it too early in the winter because of the frost damage you can cause to your trees.
Great. It's a lot of information. If anyone has questions at this point, like feel free to just unmute or put it in the chat, but if not, we'll have time for questions at the end. And then next up, Rob was going to talk a little bit more about collecting and storing scions.
Sorry, could I interrupt real quick? I
Oh
missed that.
yeah.
Thank you. I
Mhm.
missed that last sentence about cold damage and the timing.
Okay. Yeah. So
Mm.
pruning and also collecting of scions happens in late winter because we want the things to be dormant. We want the tree to be dormant. But if we do it too early in the winter time, um, I've had people ask me that, like, well, why can't you just do it as soon as the tree goes into dormancy in the winter and get it done with? Then you're risking frost damage to the branches um, because there's still a long time of winter that's coming. And that's why we prune towards the end of winter when the tree is still dormant, but it's going to come out of dormancy soon because pruning also invigorates the trees and helps to wake it up.
And yeah, and Steve and Rob also feel free to like chime in. Or also I know there's other people on the call who know stuff too. Um so yeah, anyone we all have questions and answers. And Maria is asking, how cold can nighttime temperatures be when you start pruning?
That's a good question. Robert, do you want to
Yeah,
chime in on
really,
that?
to start pruning is really for us. We usually do it anytime when the tree's dormant, and we do it actually all year round. And the reason being is because uh, dormancy pruning is more for, like Yael said, invigorating the tree. You're actually taking advantage of all the nutrients that are within the root system from last year and pruning it back. So we're not just pushing nutrient back into last year's limbs, but we're really emphasizing on fruit. And so we do dormant pruning, but we also do summer pruning for actually opening up the canopy because often enough you'll get inner branches that are taking uh, nutrient from the fruit after the bloom time, and we want to keep as much sun exposure on the fruit during that cycle. So for myself, pruning is a very pretty much a year-round thing, except for the fall. We don't really do it in the fall. We do as little as possible because that's like the most fungal, wet time of the year for us. And so we try not to open up any wounds that can't heal over at that time of year unless there is already something that's happening to the tree, such as breaks from snows, um, or fungal damage that we don't want to spread in the orchard, which means cleanliness is next to godliness, meaning we when we do this, we're taking alcohol. I usually keep alcohol with me and I'm wiping the snips and going from there. But it's really important to do that when you're actually pruning because you can pretty much spread one bad apple fungus to everything in the orchard if you're not careful. So I try to make sure that I'm between, if I see something that's kind of funky, if I'm on one tree, I'll really be careful and wipe through the whole pruning cycle on that tree and then definitely between trees. So that's just something to kind of throw in there. I didn't know if there was another question there before I kind of keep going here.
I just wanted to add, I think it's so interesting, Rob, to hear your practices because you're in a very different environment than we are. And we also prune sort of throughout the year. We do some fall pruning. Mainly that is to shorten branches to reduce snow load in the wintertime. And that seems to help because it thickens the branches. But mostly we do our pruning in the spring, and it's kind of a narrow band of time between when the snow is gone. It's kind of around the time the snow is gone. We have a time in our orchard where the ground is really soft after the snow is gone, and we don't like to get in there because it's just a mud hole. And so either we have to do it when there's just a little bit of snow on the ground and we can get in there and it's still, getting well below freezing at night, or we wait until it's dried up a little bit, which is sort of early first half of May before sap has started to flow in the trees. And then we do a little bit of summer pruning, but I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah, I would add that it's just interesting. When we had 4 or 5 feet of snow, I was out there pruning the tops. It was really easy access to get areas that I don't have to run through with a ladder. So,
Yeah.
anyways, to add to the ideas there.
Yeah, that's a good way to make the best out of that situation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So when do you do your dormant pruning and scion collecting, Robert?
So, yeah, to get into my little questionnaire there, I pretty much all the way from January through, I mean, March, really. I mean, even further. But as far as the sign collection, like now they're getting kind of later in the season. Certain varieties are more vigorous than others, and so I'm a little more careful with ones that tend to open up a little early, meaning like pristine. And you kind of have to learn your varieties, um, meaning that they don't store as well. And so sometimes we've got two microclimates. We got one orchard that's kind of in a warmer zone and another one that's in a colder zone, kind of deeper in the valley. And so sometimes if we're doing heavy grafting, if I get bad sign wood, and I should probably back up a little bit, but really when we talk about sign wood, we're talking about last year's growth. We're focusing on last year's growth. And if you're looking at these photos, you'll see that where the snips are, that's last year's growth. And Yale mentioned about the pencil width. We'll get growth that goes up to ½ inch to 3/4 at its best. And we'll kind of separate our sign wood for like the bigger stuff for grafts techniques such as rind grafting, larger branch grafts that we're going to utilize, and we can utilize bigger branches. Um, but in underneath those snips, you'll notice that below that last year's graft, there's actually you have to learn how to identify fruit spurs, and fruit spurs are pretty much second year, third year. What were leaves? They're starting out to be they'll be flowering that year, and every variety is a little bit different. There's tip bearers. Williams is more of a tip bearer, and then the other ones are second, third year limb bearers that we have a mix of both. But when we collect our sign wood, I'll put them in like 1 foot convenient cuts, and I'll cut as low as I feel good about, and I'll just put them in a bag, like a bread bag really works for us. And while I'm out there, if there's snow, I try to utilize, nothing with chlorine or chemicals like that. And I'll just put a little bit of snow in there just to make sure there's moisture. And then we'll just put it in the refrigerator. Or I think I have another photo in here, like the old timers used to do. They used to just pack it in sawdust, in wet sawdust. And really, sawdust is pretty incredible. It kind of keeps it at the perfect moisture levels. But really, the best thing to do is we just stick it in bags. And I don't try to add too many in one bag because sometimes if there's too much, it's like you'll get kind of a moisture. Too much moisture will create a rot situation or a slime situation, like broccoli in the fridge kind of situation. And we really want to keep them around somewhere above 30. I don't know. That's experience, but not freezing temperature as much as possible. Um, so there's not much to that really. It's just identifying good graph material, sign wood material, and meaning last year's growth. I usually cut the tips off anything with leaves. I don't want the leaves to be on there because that's just kind of an area for last year's fungal. So don't be afraid to cut those off. Um, what else can I cover in there?
Um, it's
You got more
what's
questions?
going on in this picture?
Yeah, so for that one, that one really was, you can see the bread bags we use. Ultimately, I'll just take, if I've got long sticks that I want to kind of use for certain graft techniques and I can't fit them in something, I could just throw a bag, keep the moisture in there. And that's just sawdust from our sawmill around here that's wet, it's been out in the snow. And you can keep that in there for quite a while. Sawdust is pretty amazing, especially if it was cold out. But ultimately, just a bread bag like that, keeping the moisture in, and very don't you don't want to add cooling water in there, just enough that the bag looks humid. Um, and then cover it up and just monitor it throughout the season. But usually they'll last through July for us in a refrigerator. Um, and really, there's not much to that unless Yale or Steve, you got any thoughts on this? I'm not sure if you got any special techniques or special refrigeration methods, but it works for us.
No, I don't. I think what you said, I mean, it's basically we do very similar stuff. We typically will collect the Scion wood, and I tend to leave it longer
Hmm.
in longer pieces, and then wrap it in no more than the bundles are no bigger than what I can grab in my hand,
Hmm.
and then basically take like tea towels and moisten them, dampen them, and wrap them in tea towels and put them in a garbage bag and store them in our root cellar, which is about refrigerator temperature at that time of the spring. And yeah, they'll stay in there for quite a while as usable wood. And then if it gets too old, we'll go collect more. And we've had pretty good success collecting wood and grafting when buds are breaking too. So we actually do outdoor grafting on, you know, up until they're flowering more or less on active trees, and we can take wood off of trees and put it onto different trees. If it's at the same stage of development, it seems to still work fairly well. But for indoor grafting, yeah, it tends to be pretty dormant.
I'll add a note on here. I just thought it was really interesting. We're getting into the grafting techniques, but one of the things that I've learned, there's a gentleman here that creates colloidal silver generators. Colloidal silver is they utilize it, especially in the old days, for it's an antifungal. Anyways, we sometimes instead of putting normal water in there, just as a fungicide, we'll put colloidal silver. We'll rinse our signwood in colloidal silver just to keep it to last longer if we needed it, and it actually works really, really well. It's also we could put it in sprays if we had to, if we had a disease that we were concerned about. And then just to add to what you're saying, Steve, is um, a lot of people don't realize this, but when you do graft, our orchard is made up with double grafts, meaning that we have a semi-dwarf and a dwarf inner stem, and then our signwood on top. And many people believe that you're supposed to do that in a 2-year cycle, but we found that you can do that in a 1-year cycle. So you can actually double graft on top if you do it right. So it's just a technique that I've learned, and but it is possible.
We've been doing that with some of our plums where we have compatibility issues between the variety that we want to grow and the rootstock. So if A doesn't work on C, but B works on C and A
That's
works on
awesome.
B, you can go A, B, C, right? And we've done
Yeah,
that in the same year too, doing double grafts to
yeah.
try to get incompatible varieties to grow on the rootstock that we have.
So, as far as compatibility, like, is there information out there available for people to like easily figure out if this rootstock is going to be compatible with this Scion, or is it just like trial and error?
You want to answer that, Steve?
I would say with with apples, well, I think it's incomplete. I think you can find some information out there, but you have to do some hunting and pecking. Most apples are compatible with most apple rootstocks, I would say. It's not universally the case. Um, Plums are a lot more picky because there's Japanese plums, there's American plums, there's European plums. They are much more particular about what they're grafted onto. I'm not sure about pears. They seem to be fairly compatible across things, but that's my experience anyway. We've had years where we have like one variety doesn't do well, and we've wondered whether it was the rootstock that we got that year, but it's probably more the quality of the Scion that it is the rootstock, I would think. The Scion was just not good that year, some winter damage or something, and we didn't catch it, and we had bad take. Um, yeah, so the plums are much more picky. We've had issues with trees clearly demonstrating grafting compatibility after they're 5 years old. You know, the rootstock will be 4 inches in diameter and the top will be 2 inches in diameter, or vice versa. And then eventually they don't make it. they just the graft fails because of the incompatibility between the two things.
Yeah.
Mm.
You know,
Bad.
I had a thought when Steve was talking. One of the things that we've run into, like you said, when people send sign wood, immediately what I'll do is I'll colloidal silver it, just because I don't want to bring disease from their orchard over to mine. I want to make sure I can sanitize it the best I know how. And that's worked. And then one of the indicators before you actually graft it is you want green cambium. So if you cut into this thing and it's brown, that's an indicator something's not right. I've seen it also where sticks have been diseased where it's speckled brown inside the cambium. So it's not quite green, but it's not brown, but there's like check marks in the wood. And that's an indicator that's not healthy wood. And so before you put it on your nice pretty tree and you bring it into your orchard, it really sanitation is super important, especially when you're bringing stuff from down south. We don't have a lot of the issues that they have down there. We're not spraying like them. And so we have some advantages, but it's just really important to, if you see those indicators, to pay attention and yeah, to consider those options. And and like Steve said, I mean, sometimes it's not the rootstock. Maybe you think it is, but when you're doing it, there are things you can see prior if you just pay attention.
It's a super good point. Since it's already 12:40, I wanted to make sure that we do get some time for everyone to just throw out like their top performers or top picks for rootstock and Scionwood. I know you guys kind of already mentioned that before, but yeah, just and then if everyone in the webinar wants to put in the chat like where you're calling in from, it would just be nice to get an idea of like what the climates are that we're working with.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I did see one question somebody asked about bud grafting, if it's the same kind of things. It is not. Bud grafting is a different animal altogether. And the scion for bud grafting is something that you collect right during the summer, during the active growing season, because you're collecting just a tiny little just a few centimeters size. And so I'm not going to get into that right now, but just understand that it's a different thing. Just so the Anchorage area, this is what I have experience with. Baccata is also called Siberian crabapple, and it's what I'm most familiar with because the Alaska Pioneer Fruit Growers Association orders this in bulk, and it is one of the hardiest apple rootstocks, and it's also very accepting of various scions. There's very little incompatibility issues, so that's um, one of the most common ones. It does grow into a full size tree, and by that we mean like maybe 15 feet, and maybe even more. So there are other recommendations out there for dwarfing size apples. Now, baccata, you can keep it smaller just by active pruning. So it just means it's going to have a bigger root system, and you're going to have to, be actively pruning it if you want it to be in a smaller area, or you want to keep it where it's short and you don't have to use a ladder. Like what I was explaining before is the rootstock determines the size of your tree besides pruning. Pruning obviously affects it as well. But there are some dwarfing sizes, and Bud 9, Budagovsky 9 is one of them. M26 or Emla 26 is another one that we do have, and we are using at Boyers for apples. For cherries, K5 or Crimps 5 is one that's being used a lot. It's very precocious. And when we're talking about precocious or precocity, we're talking about how much fruit it produces. And so the Crimps series are very good for that. So K5 is for cherries, and K1 is for like apricots, peaches, and maybe plums. Scion one as far as some of my favorite varieties. We have so many, and it changes from year to year, but just a good overall basic ones that I like. Ginger Gold. It's a beautiful apple. It ripens over an extended period of time, so we get to pick it from mid to late September all the way into until a hard frost in October, mid to late October. You can cook with it, you can eat it, you can make sauce with it. It's just a really good one. Chestnut crabapple. This is We have several crab apples growing at Boyers, and none of them are crabby crab apples. They are delicious. Chestnut is just called the crab apple because it's smaller, but it has a wonderful nutty flavor. It's very sweet and juicy, great for juice sauce. We like it because it's a good size for kids. It's a good snacking size apple. Um, and it's also ripens over an extended period. And the other reason chestnut crabapple is really good is because of its long pollen or long flowering cycle. It makes a wonderful pollinator. We didn't get into all of this in detail, but most apple trees need to have two different varieties that are blossoming at the same time in order to cross pollinate when you're planting your garden. And having a crab apple, even the ornamental crab apples within a bee's flight is helpful. But chestnut crab apple does both for you. It's a great pollinator and a great apple to eat. Zestar is another one. It's a modern variety. It's large, it's juicy, it's crisp, it has beautiful coloring, and fairly disease resistant. So those are some of my favorites.
And if people are in different agricultural zones, like what would they need to consider if they were gonna try any of these varieties?
For sure. Yeah. So your rootstock does determine the hardiness of your tree, but um, scion wood also plays a part into it. Because some of them ripen, and even it's not so much the zone, but when they are set to ripen, if you are in Alaska and most parts of Alaska, grit, getting scion wood from what they call in the lower 48 a winter apple is not recommended because those don't ripen until later into October, November, or even December. That's one of the reasons why the classic issue with Honeycrisp is such a problem here in Alaska is because everybody wants Honeycrisp, and you see that it's zone 3 or 4, so you think you can grow it, but in northern climates, it doesn't ripen until late October, and so many people plant it. They sell it a lot, like at the box stores. You take it home, you plant it, and yeah, you see this apple, but it's still green in September, October, and then the frost hits so hard, and it's too late then. So those are all considerations you want to look for if you're buying outside of Alaska. You want to look for apples that are summer or fall apples, not winter apples. So that was a long explanation about that. Sorry.
Oh, that was good. Thank you. So just given we only have 12 minutes left, I think maybe we should just leave it open for question and answer, unless Rob or Steve, if you really want to like throw out some information on varieties at this point.
I guess I would just tell people that if you go onto our website, we have a page on most of the varieties of apples that we grow on there, which has got some information on them. One thing that we run into with people is, I might like apple X, but you might like apple Y. There's a lot of personal taste involved in who likes what. But there's also apples come in, we have almost 100 varieties growing. Some of them are good for making pies. Some of them are good for eating. Some of them are good for making juice. Some of them are good for making sauce. And so when you're thinking about what apple variety to grow, then maybe start with thinking about what you want to do with the apples because they're not all good for everything, I guess.
I'll add, um, for us, it's very interesting listening to your guys' varieties. I've tried a lot of them here, and I'd be curious, Yeld, are you doing those in the greenhouse or are those working outside?
Those are all outside.
Okay, so the Zestar is actually ripening fully outside.
It is. We actually have one in the green. We have some in the greenhouse and some outside. We have some on dwarfing rootstock and some on full size rootstock, and it's one that I find that I like no matter which of those situations.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we've done all those, and so our biggest problem down the southeast has been really apple scab, um, and Zestar is less of that, but it can crack. So we've been really instead of fighting constant um, bad varieties, we've kind of honed in and into really Williams Pride. Ginger Gold is actually pretty good. It actually works pretty good here. It's less fruitful than most, but it does do pretty well and can ripen outside. Canadian Strawberry is another one we're finding. Um, there's Trailman Crab is good for us. Dolgo as well. There's one called Premier Honeycrisp that actually ripens like 3 weeks earlier, and it may put you closer to Zestar. And so that brings out some potential. We found that to work okay, but it's not as vigorous. And so it really should be probably on a more vigorous root system than what we have it on, especially in a colder climate. And that's something that wasn't mentioned, but we don't, you kind of need a little more vigor at times here just because we got such a short growing season. And so we get a lot of people that want dwarfing trees, which actually can be pretty productive. We utilize B9 Budwin 18. We're learning that it doesn't do well on the clays. And we've got a lot of our root systems are actually on tried and true trees here. Some of them are on rogue trees that we found over the years, so we don't even know what they are. Some of them we found that they actually can grow in a muskeg, which is kind of exciting because those are ones for our area that I'm kind of targeting for root systems. And we found out the wild crab apple does work, but it's a hard wood. And usually, if you have a late season variety, later woods are tend to be later ripening varieties tend to have a harder wood on them. Um, so, anyways, I can keep going on. I did want to say hi, Tabitha. I did send you a little note here that you were asking about growth on your trees. You really should have 12 to 24 inches of growth every year. Um, Really, if you're getting less than that, that's an indicator that something's not right, or you need to add some more nitrogen or nutrients, something there. Kevin, I see you had something on colloidal silver. Colloidal silver, you really could do a YouTube on it. A lot of people, it's kind of coming back. It used to be that, the royal people used to eat off of silver spoons. Well, there was a reason for that because it's a antimicrobial, and so it's ionized silver. There's actually you can buy it, or there's a guy here that actually makes silver generators. And really, that's just one thing. It's not like a standardized chemical that's a fungicide. There's other fungicides out there, but that's something we use, and I feel like it's a more natural thing and less aggressive for antimicrobial. So I just put that out there. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions. I
I
see.
think maybe one that got missed was, have you found a good, better, best portion of the Scion to use for grafting? I've
Not
read some who think we should avoid the wood that is close to the tip end.
yeah. So that can be true because usually the tip seems to be more susceptible to frost burn. It usually, especially if you get too much nitrogen on there, that's usually a dead point. You end up with dieback. It never hardens off prior to the initial freezes. So I usually just cut those off. But if you do have a hardened off one, really you're trying to match a stick as close to the root system that you have. But that's not always true because sometimes you get root systems that are way larger, like a 1 inch. And you saw in those photos, those are really not the most ideal graphs, but those photos that you had on there were like one inch, inch and a half, and you can really rejuvenate a root system um, by getting creative. And the idea with grafting is utilizing cambium to cambium contact to actually uh, get the graft to take. And so size in that point, I was saying that if we get a large rind graft that we're going to utilize, we want a larger stick as much as possible, get as much wood on there as possible. So yeah, the tips usually you'd cut off, and we'd usually leave 3 buds on there, but you can do more, and you can do a double graft. You just got to kind of master it. And whip and tongue grafts, if you spend some energy on YouTube, those are very popular and perhaps a better graft union than bud grafts. So I'm not sure if you got something else there, Yale.
No,
Well,
no,
just since
that's
there's only 5 minutes left, I wanted to say if people want to learn more about grafting too, we have yeah, Ella's going to be teaching a hybrid, like in-person and virtual course on basic fruit tree care. So the it's 4 different sessions from like April. They're just 1 hour a piece on Thursdays at noon from April through June. So that might be of interest to folks, and I'll put that in the chat. And then sorry, also, did I interrupt you, Yael? Did you want to say something?
no, that's good. I was just
Okay.
replying to Melissa, who had specific questions about what would grow best in Dillingham and Bristol Bay, and we don't have time to go over that now, but I'd be more than happy to talk with you and refer you to the right people if you send me an email.
Great.
And I can't recommend enough the Alaska Pioneer Fruit Growers Association. Their website is not always completely up to date, but it's a resource with so much information. And attending their meetings is how I learned to take care of Boyer's Orchard, because there's just so much experience and knowledge and yeah, data that's there for everybody.
Yeah, their newsletters are also really informative.
Very
And
informative.
it's only like $16 to be a member.
Yes. Yeah. And if you're able to attend their Scion exchange, that will happen on April 19th, Sunday. That's the best place to get a huge variety of free Scion and very discounted rootstocks, and well worth the $16 membership fee in order to be able to go in at 2 o'clock instead of 3 o'clock when the public is admitted, because you get about 1.5 hours and it's like a mad scramble to get the ones that you want.
Hmm.
So yeah, grafting is a lot of fun, but this is the time to prepare whether you buy the Scion wood. I like on the Facebook group, there's a North American Scion Exchange. People either trade out or buy from each other. Lots of good feedback and information. Or you're collecting it. I'm going down to visit my dad in Washington. He said, well, he's got a neighbor down the road that has really, really tasty apples. And so I'm just going to go show him how to cut off, with permission, cut off a couple of small branches and how he can graft them onto his existing apple trees. You don't have to do bench grafting with just baby trees. You can change out, if you only have, a couple trees or you only have a little bit of space, you can change out some of the branches in your own tree so that you can increase or change the variety. That's called top working.
Mhm.
And I don't know if we already covered this. Where can people get rootstock?
Yeah, rootstock. Well, here the Alaska Pioneer Fruit Growers Association, they do a big bulk order, but you have to order at them usually in fall. However, at their grafting workshop, they do have some available for sale because they always order extras. You can order them online. Fedco Trees, One Green World, Cummins Nursery. There's a lot of them out there. Mehrabian is the one that lately we've been ordering from. They seem to always have lots in stock. Um, yeah, just go online and search, or grow your own. And there's lots of resources on that. I'm very excited to hear that Steve, that the Mastermans are working on increasing opportunities for locally grown rootstock. That's very important.
All right. Thank you guys so much. And this was awesome. So many people showed up. If anyone has questions or wants to follow up in the after this, just send me an email and I can help get you in touch with whoever and whatever information. Yeah. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.